I used to do lots of things.
I used to do things and I'd say things and Jesus I was evil. Take things and break things and Jesus I was evil. I never shook baby.
What you drinking there?
This is lemonade and vodka.
Okay.
Name for that. No. I'm doing the thing. You like you're a vodka boy, right?
I do like vodka because it doesn't tend to give me hangovers. I'm a big vodka tonic, vodka club guy. Club's vodka soda, I should say.
Oh,
yeah, cool. I am. But lemonade, a little too sugary. Is it low sugar?
Yeah. This is this is homemade lemonade, so we got a lot of lemons.
It's very southern on you. You do have a lemon tree. I'm very jealous of that.
3 lemon trees.
Do you actually pick the lemons or no?
Oh yeah. That's like one of the few. Yeah. I'm dead serious. Like it's one of the few opportunities I get to be like actually Mexican, where like I go out with the thing and I'm like picking fruit out. It was funny because every time I do that, my roommates are like, "That's the first time I've ever seen Joe look Mexican." Like that was kind
of like. You're Jose when you're doing that.
I don't.
All right. But, do you have any of the? Are there birds? What's the bird? It's like a parrot or something.
Yeah, we got parrots. We got wild parrots, and for the longest time, I was cool with it when I first moved to Highland Park because there's just a whole crazy story. But long story short, somebody in Pasadena, which is just north of where I live, they bought like parrots, like tropical parrots, and I guess
rich people.
And then they just let them run loose, fly loose, I guess. And so now we have parrots, and which is. When I first moved to LA, when I was living in that shared house, it was cool. Like waking up at like 6:37 in the morning, hearing parrots chirp. Not really chirping. It's kind of a weird name.
Like squawk.
Yeah. But it was kind of cool. I was like, oh, this is LA. Just you wake up to the sound of parrots. But now they eat our oranges, and like they eat half the orange and then
just leave it.
And they drop it. And so now like our whole front yard. I know. And then I have to pick it up. So our whole front yard is just littered with half-eaten oranges, and then they attract rats. So we had a rat problem briefly.
They attract rats? Oh, the oranges attract rats.
Yeah.
Do you ever see coyotes?
No, I think I've seen some, like when I went to Griffith Park, but I haven't seen them not in my area though. No.
Yeah, you gotta be careful with them with Chomper.
Yeah.
But Chomper's not really like outdoors, right? Except on a leash.
Nah.
You don't just like let him out.
Nah.
Or he's in that like little space you have, which is like the little Chomper space.
Yeah.
All right. Enough about birds and you being Mexican. What are we talking about today?
So you and I both read Quentin Tarantino's Cinema Speculation. So what'd you think of it? What do you think? What are your sort of general thoughts, your initial thoughts on the book?
Good. Very good. It was very you could tell. I like when a book is quote unquote written by like a celebrity who's not a writer. Like and another example that comes to mind would be Scar Tissue by Anthony Kiedis, like his book. Like when I'm reading that, it feels like he wrote it. Like it doesn't feel like it was a ghostwriter, and that's how I felt about Cinema Speculation. I could like hear his voice, his cadence, his passion. It didn't feel like he hired someone to like compile his notes into a book about 1970s cinema. So I did appreciate that. Also, I love the dude. I didn't realize like I associate Quentin Tarantino with orange. I don't know why. I feel like it used to be yellow because of like Kill Bill.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about like Giallo films, which are like Italian horror. It's like a horror genre for Italian movies. Giallo, by the way, means yellow in Italian. But I don't know. When I got this book, I was like, oh, that just like fits so well. This cover. I'm going to take it off because I like to read without.
It's a really thick, floppy book cover.
It is. And also, of course, my cat right here, he managed to get to it. You can see the puncture marks. I took it off. And I thought that was going to protect it.
Yeah.
Little did I know. He's a pain in the ass. He's right here.
Orange is a very 70s color. Like I've seen a lot of stores in LA, like hipster sort of vintage clothing stores, and like it'll be like yellow, orange, and brown. Like so, I associate that with 70s.
I do too. And so they were like New York City taxis and like hot summers. And I don't know why. I think the 70s was always just hot. Everything was hot. If there was lots of summer movies, everyone was like pissed off and sweaty and angry, and there was just like fire hydrant kids like cranking open fire hydrants, and it's very much a stereotype. But I always think like New York City. I think it's because of some of the like Mean Streets and Taxi Driver and Son of Sam, which wasn't it takes place in the 70s. It wasn't shot in the 70s, of course, but just those sorts of movies. Like I don't know why I think like New York City and just grimy and gross and hot.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that 70s depiction of New York City.
I do too. So let's talk about that, because basically the book is kind of just Quentin Tarantino talking about movies he likes, how they impacted his. So you do actually learn a lot about his childhood, and it does. I don't think people, understandably, because how would you like know about his childhood and how it impacted, of course, his directing and what kind of stories he wrote and made, and how kind of it seemed like a tough childhood, really interesting, but also kind of sad. Like he didn't know his father at all, right, and he was raised by a single mom, and it sounded like a lot of times like with roommates and kind of like drifters and people coming in and out. And he never said he was in any danger, which is good. Because I feel like parents in like the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of latchkey kids. There were a lot of just like honestly just like shitty parents who like Joan Didion's books, kind of, I forget which one that is. It played as it lays, or the center will not hold, or like whatever those. But it talks about that, like how they would have parties and there'd be needles on the ground and a baby like crawling by in a diaper with like heroin needles on the ground. But it didn't sound like any of that. But just really, his passion for movies came from his mom, and that's just what you did back then, and not just then, but like even if you watch like Seinfeld, which I do, like I probably watch Seinfeld start to finish every few years. We're just constantly going to the movies. It's like what you did on Saturday night or Friday night sometimes. And
it's crazy. Like going to the movies for me, it's like I go once a month or once every couple of months or so.
You go that often?
Yeah. But even that, like that, it feels like a big deal. Like like back then, like for in the 60s and 70s, it was like, you went once or twice a week. Like it was just sort of like, oh, I got 50 cents. Yeah, I'll go see a movie. I'll go see it. I got an afternoon to kill. It's just like,
that's just like what you did for dates. I mean, you still do, but like for dates with friends, like you just went to go because you didn't have the options at home. And I feel like it was more affordable. Like I feel like movies are one of those things that become like exponentially more expensive, not just with inflation and other services and entertainment, but like exponentially more expensive, like college.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know for sure about this, but I asked my dad that. It's like, how come it went from 50 cents to $20? Like, and he said, and I think he's just kind of riffing, but he's like, actors sometime between like the 70s and 80s just started demanding way more money, so it's like big budgets got bigger. I don't know exactly how true. I think that there's at least some truth to that, because I know in the 80s movies got more glossy and more higher, like production values started to really go up more. So I don't know if that was exactly the transition, but it does seem like it's like, you would think that they'd be like, okay, they're after since the 70s maybe they go up to like $12. But no, it's like $20 now. It's crazy.
I know. I've barely been to any movies since COVID, and it's not like a scared COVID thing. It was they shut down for a while, like you couldn't, and then I just didn't really get back in, and the costs are like prohibitive. It's like I can rent the movie at home, I can have a drink, I can get up and go to the bathroom and pause it, and I can rent it I can either get it for free on one of the many streaming services I pay for, or I could just rent it for like $6 or something, almost always. And then I'm at home in the comfort of my own house, and instead of like going like pre-COVID, I went and I saw It 2 in a theater, not one of the ones I really like. It just happened to be a different one. And there are a bunch of like teenagers who like kind of like ruined the movie. Like, I don't have to deal with that in my house.
Right, exactly.
And so the most recent movie I saw, we talked about it already, was After Sun. Really cool theater. Like, it was a fun experience, but that's not something I'm going to do, once a month. If you probably not even once every 2-3 months.
Yeah. For me now, it's interesting, the attitude towards going to movies back in the 70s versus the attitude of going to movies today, where it seemed like it's like if you had an afternoon to kill and you were bored, it's like, okay, I'll go see this movie. It doesn't look very good, but I'm bored, so I'll go anyway. But now for me, I don't know if it's the same for you, but it's like I usually only go to the movies if there's a movie that I want to see.
100%.
I'm waiting for this. So
you nailed that too. There's so much less risk now with me going to a movie, because if it sucks, you don't get your money back. Like, you
exactly.
Don't get to, like, you have to sit through it. If I start a movie, and rarely will I not finish a movie, also because I write reviews for movies. So if it sucks, well, it gives me something to write about at least. But like, if it's really that bad, I can like turn it off or something, and I didn't feel like I wasted my money, because I'm not going to pay for, even renting at home, something that I don't really want to see. That doesn't mean everything I want to see is good. Like, a lot of times there are disappointments, but you're right. Like, it's much more like, oh, I know this is at least going to be good to fantastic. I'm not risking something that sucks to go spend, $17 on the ticket, popcorn, soda, all that. It's like $35 to go see something that's like, well, that was a C-. Like,
and here's the other thing too that Tarantino kind of touches on. It, like, for him, he points out the names of specific theaters that he went to, and it seemed like each one had like a different experience. Where it's like, this is a grindhouse theater, so it's gonna be rowdy. This is like a more fancy theater, so this is gonna be like a high class picture. And there are drive-ins where nowadays, like, everything is so corporatized. It's like
it's all the same.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like so even if you were going to a movie that you weren't really excited about, you'd at least be like, okay, but I'm going to the drive-in. Like, I'll get some popcorn.
It was kind of like, it was like going to a baseball stadium or football. Exactly. It was like, oh, I went to this theater. That is what I liked about the one I just went to in the city. The one in the East Village. It's like, oh, this is like cool architecture. It's historic. It's it's not an AMC or whatever the others are. I can't think of them off the top of my head. What's AMC's competitor? I feel like
Century 16 or something.
I don't know. There used to be more when I was growing. Even like, but like, honestly, even growing up, we went to movies a lot more often.
Oh yeah.
I remember I went to see Drumline twice and walked out both times, like, because I was like, once I went with a girl and once I went with friends, and both times we left. And that was just and it was like downtown and like the downtown area of my town. So it was like, it was just more of a social thing. I don't know if kids do that as much anymore. I think sometimes, like, to just get away from, the wandering eyes of adults, but at least for other people, it's not nearly as common.
Right.
So yeah, I like that point too that you made, where it's like he would see the same movie several times in different neighborhoods that had different audiences, and he would say like how sometimes certain lines would go over well in all of them, sometimes they wouldn't. You would see different reactions. A lot of times it was based on like race or economics or something like that. I did think that was really interesting, and obviously his love of movies cannot be overstated.
He reminds me so much of like a comic book guy from The Simpsons, where like he gets overly technical and but like in a very endearing way. But they're like, he'll get into, and another thing I like about the book too is that he doesn't chime on, he doesn't really talk too much about like classic movies that much. Like it's like he's not talking about The Godfather or Apocalypse Now. He's talking about like usually like sort of like grindhouse movies or movies that were kind of popular at the for a bit, but they're not really as well known today. So I like that he's but like it shows his attention to detail, where it's like, hey, there's this movie that people have forgotten about, but it's worth watching because of this one performance or because of this style that you don't see too much these days, and it's worth checking out for that.
I mean, he does just list sometimes movies and actors and people in the business who, I know like a lot more about movies than the average person, and I don't know who some of these people are. but I would say besides that, he's very focused on this time, this area. It does have a flow to it in the sense of it's kind of like chronological, right? He starts in like the late 60s, like 68 or 69 with what's he start with?
I think it was Bullet was the first.
Bullet, Bullet. So he kind of starts like Steve McQueen and then goes through really to the early 80s.
The Funhouse, I think, was the last.
But it's really it's really about the 70s. Like it's about the 70s movies, which I always loved 70s movies. I didn't realize how many greats came out of that until I went through all 4 of my movie lists. I noted every 70s movie that I've watched in the last 4 years, because each list is a year. I go Memorial Day to Memorial Day. That's like my movie watching year. I don't know why. This is how I started it. Kind of like the financial year or whatever. So, you know, obviously everyone knows The Godfather, right? That's early 70s. But like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, I've probably seen more than any other movie. I've literally probably seen it 30 times just growing up watching it. Clockwork Orange. Taxi Driver, Annie Hall, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I believe is the best movie ever made. It's not my favorite, but I think it's the best movie ever made.
That's true. Well, that's directed by Milos Forman. And also the guy who played, is it Billy Babbitt, the stuttering guy? He plays the voice of Chucky in the Child's Play movies.
I thought that was Luke Skywalker.
No, you're thinking of Mark Hamill. Brad Dourif is the one who plays. Oh, I'm sorry. In the new one, in the reboot of Chucky, they brought on Mark Hamill. But really? for up until that, it was Brad Dourif who played the stuttering guy.
The originals weren't Mark Hamill?
No.
Oh, I didn't know
Brad
that.
Dourif,
Well, that's a great. I just think so. I don't want to go on Cuckoo's Nest. You know, I don't want to talk about that. But to me, like I watched it maybe 2 years ago, and I'd seen it. My mom always loved it. I remember watching it as a kid. I liked it, but you know, I was a kid, and then throughout the years, I'd seen it here and there. But then when I watched it from like a critical eye and as a 29, 30-year-old, I was like, there's not a wasted shot or line or moment in this movie. It's about power and justice, but like in this microcosm of it, and how like you think you can fight back, but like in the end you will lose. It's depressing and uplifting at the same time because of the ending. It's like this anti-hero, which now has become such a common character, but at the time I think was like very original. I don't know. I just loved it. I remember just being like, holy crap, this is, I think, the best movie ever made.
I need to rewatch it. So I really enjoyed it the first time I watched it, but I watched like 8 years ago. But like because I love Milos Forman, because he also directed Amadeus, which is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yes, amazing movie.
Oh yeah,
that's the 80s, right?
Yeah, 84. 80s. So I want to go back and rewatch One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But I remember just being really floored by like the perfect balance of like wacky humor and like pathos. Like it's also like a very it's hilarious, but it's also really tragic though. So it's just like
it's so tragic. It's so like I don't know. I love it. My favorite. What I say is my favorite movie is Children of Men. I think the best movie is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Exorcist, of course, I love. I'm a huge exorcism buff. And that's that's the Godfather of exorcism movies. Deer Hunter. I mean, I said Clockwork Orange, which I love.
I still haven't seen that once, but I know that the director, Michael Cimino, I think his name was.
Wait, what
he's the one who actually
seen?
What
have you seen?
I've the Monty Python. I still haven't seen that one, and I haven't seen Deer Hunter.
Oh, you haven't?
No, I've seen a bunch of parts of it. But Michael Cimino, the guy who directed that one, he's often blamed for kind of ending the movie brats generation of the 80s. And it wasn't because of Deer Hunter. It was because of a movie that he did in like 1980 or 81 called Heaven's Gate. And so like he won an Oscar.
I've heard of Heaven's Gate. What is that?
It was this huge big budget period piece. And so this is right after he won an Oscar for the Deer Hunter, which was a huge hit. So it was sort of like, like this guy, he came out of nowhere and he made this huge movie and it was highly acclaimed. So it was sort of like, hey, let's just give him tons of money to do
carte
whatever the hell he
blanche. It
wanted.
happens all the time. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And it was a huge flop, and it was a long ass movie, like 3.5, 4 hours long, and they had to cut it down. And
okay, I'm thinking of something else though. Who else had a big flop like that though? Was it Spielberg?
Where they started off really big, but then they followed it up, but with like a flop.
Yeah, that was like the most expensive movie at the time, since like Cleopatra or something, and it like literally almost like bankrupted Columbia Pictures, or like one of the big ones. I'll look it up. I know.
I actually just wrote an article about this for Slash Film, where it was movies that caused the bankruptcy of studios.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was kind of seen as like he was kind of putting. I mean, it's not really official, but it is sort of like, yeah, that was the point when we thought like when studios were banking on all of these guys, and then like that was the first sort of like, okay, we got to rein you guys in a little bit. You guys got a little too carried away.
Right. I think I don't want to get too off track because I do want to talk about the book itself, and then we can diverge a little more. So I'm just kind of looking at my notes here. So I actually have not seen Dirty Harry. It kind of surprised me. I was reading this. I was like, oh shit. So when I added a bunch of movies to my list that from this book that I hadn't seen, the only two I've gotten to before this episode are Rolling Thunder, which I loved, and the movie he talks about really low budget was The Lords of Flatbush, which is Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah,
really,
I like see that one.
It was good. I finished it 2 nights ago. Very low budget, very stereotypical, like the Italian Americans in the leather jackets and deep Brooklyn with the accents.
Yeah.
The greaser getting the kind of Protestant conservative girl.
Yeah.
I think Sylvester Stallone is really good in it. There's one scene when you watch it. My favorite scene was he's in a jewelry shop and they're like in high school, like literally still in high school, and like getting married because he gets her pregnant or not, or whatever it is. I don't think she is, but just like his mannerisms in that scene and how he's trying to stay tough and look cool in front of a jeweler or in front of his girlfriend, but he also like knows he doesn't have the money to buy this ring. He's like kind of pissed off at everyone for putting him in that position, and it's a really just well done scene. And he's so young. I mean, this is pre-Rocky, so like he's a nobody at this point. And Tarantino talks about in this book like why this movie got. Do you remember why this movie was popular? It was one of those things where it was like because someone saw it who happened to put it on like some bill, right? Or like some like to like got into like basically a movie this cheap shouldn't have gotten into as many theaters as it did.
Yeah, somehow it caught
the break. Yeah,
it caught the attention of someone at a bigger studio. So to enter, so even though it was produced by a small studio for very little money, it ended up getting distributed by a larger studio and actually became kind of profitable. That was interesting because like George Lucas kind of restarted like this. He's when he kind of started like the nostalgia for the 50s and early 60s with American Graffiti. So there was like this big sort of like, oh yeah, the greasers and hot rods and that sort of thing. There was kind of like resurgence of that in the 80s, in the 70s.
Yeah, because shit was so shitty, and people were like, oh, the 50s was so idealized. You know, what I always say is I love American Graffiti. I think it's a really good. I actually rewatched that.
That's a good one.
I actually rewatched that like last year. And what's funny is that it came out in 73. It takes place in 62. So it's not like that'd be like a movie coming out now for nostalgia in like 2011 or something.
I know it'd be hard. It's like if I'm watching a movie and it says in 2012 or whatever, I'd be like things look almost exactly the same.
Yes.
Like, why was it a period piece?
I know, but like I really think there was a dramatic shift from 1962 to 1973.
Yeah,
the culture changed a ton. Where culture, in 30 years, will people be comparing 2023 to 2012 and be like, look, they might have a point. Like because we've lived it and we're in it right now. But honestly, 2012, pretty fucking awesome in my life. And like, I don't know, maybe it was totally different. Like, that people are going to use 2016 was this huge moment, and then 2020 because of COVID. And I do think times were different. Like there was this malaise during the late Obama, like the second Obama term. Things were kind of boring. Well, you had ISIS cutting people's heads off, but besides that, like it was relatively boring. We were kind of coming out of the financial crash, and like now it's just madness.
I know.
Like social media was tamer, while at the same time exposed, like being more open, but like people seemed more civil. Like it wasn't as insane. So maybe it was a lot different, just not as aesthetically different.
Right. Yeah, no, it's funny because like, you know, my parents, they grew up in the 60s and 70s, and my mom's you know, now that they're starting to hear about culture war stuff, she's like, I don't remember talking so much about race since like 1969 sort of thing. We're just like, it's just so crazy. Like it seemed like when we were growing, like you know when I was growing up in like in the 90s, it seemed like racism was largely confined to like a handful of small backwoods towns in the South or some shit. But it's like, oh, okay, you know, I'm growing up in San Jose in California, whatever. Racism is a thing of a past, whatever. And so, but yeah, it's just so funny. We're just like, shit, like it wasn't even that long ago where we didn't talk that much about race and stuff.
Which is crazy because like those were some of the most tumultuous times. For race. I mean, like Martin Luther King was assassinated. You had left-wing bombings all over the 60s and 70s in places like New York. It was a real, and in the 90s, we have this idealized, like every generation, you kind of just look like 10 to 15 years back. So like our generation, you could tell, and even not that long ago, like the mid 2010s, there's like this 80s obsession. You had Stranger Things, and you had this, and then quickly it was into the 90s, and it was like Friends again, and just like this big 90s nostalgia. And I think like I have that because I wasn't alive in the 80s. I was born in 90. So like I and my cognizance wasn't really in the early 90s. So like really it's the late 90s, like boy bands and Britney Spears and Pokemon, and it was very Japanese heavy. Like that's a huge part in our culture. And now the kids are like the Gen Z's into like 2000 shit. Like everyone just kind of looks like 15 years back. And I guess that's what happened with American Graffiti, because I mean he does say in here 50s, but like American Graffiti is not the 50s, it's the early.
I know
60s.
it's like 62, right? Or 61,
62.
Yeah. But I think, you know, it was still early enough in the 60s where it was like, you know, like you know, like the 50s were still kind of leaking in, like they hadn't quite, you know.
Totally.
It was still hot rods and greasers and shit. So
yes, absolutely. And it's not, I mean, different parts of the country, different cities, different places, like change at different paces. And I always think like Mad Men's early 60s, and even then it's like the hippies are just kind of starting. It was really the beats into the hippies. And because I remember like early in Mad Men, I think season 1, he has a Don Draper, who's, you know, the quintessential clean shaven, wearing suit, literally works on Madison Avenue guy. And he's like arguing with some guys, like not a hippie. He's kind of like pre-hippie, like beard and a little disheveled and a open shirt or whatever. And it's like, oh, just wait 7 years. Wait till what happens with this shit. Because Summer of Love was what, 67 or 68?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, 69.
And then,
well, anyway, it's
no, 69 was the Sharon Tate murders. That was like what killed it.
That's the end of
that was the end of it. Literally, that's the end of it. I think 67 was the Summer of Love. But anyway, again, last thing, the 90s. Yeah, I listen to podcasts talks about this all the time. The 90s were a shit show. You had like white supremacist bombings. You had Ruby Ridge. You had Timothy McVeigh. You had some of the first big Islamic bombings in Tanzania and Kenya. Like it was not this idealized place. And you actually had like what I would argue like the left wing I associate more with the kind of the battle. Well, that was early 2000s, like battle in Seattle, like anti-globalization left that actually stood for something. But it was not this like peaceful time. It was just the economy was good until it wasn't. In 98, there was a crash. There's the tech bubble burst, but it was this exciting time that, like anything, like the 60s were one of the most glorified ages ever, and it was horrendous for a lot of people. Right.
Well, this is a good segue for like the transition of like the 70s, because it's funny, like because like I've always been a fan of like the 70s, sort of like the movie brats, and I knew.
Can you define?
It was interesting. Yeah. So the movie brats was an interesting generation. So you know, like the most famous, like the big four would be Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and Martin Scorsese. But there were a bunch of other directors and you know directors that Tarantino talks about, like Brian De Palma and Paul Schrader and other guys.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about that generation is that it was the first big film making generation where they actually went to film school, because before that, I don't know exactly when film schools became prevalent, but like before that, like during the golden age of Hollywood, film schools were not really, they didn't really exist. It's like you either started off in theater and then you moved to Hollywood, or you started off at on a lower position and worked your way up to director. But so all those guys that I just listed, like these were all film nerds. Like these were guys who they went to college and they worshipped Howard Hawks and George Cukor and John Ford and a lot of those Hollywood. So it's like you had like these young idealistic guys saying, hey, I want to do what those guys were doing in the 40s, and I want to do that in Hollywood today. Some other things were happening that made the 70s a very vital time for filmmaking. You had the relaxation of the film code. So the Hays Code existed from like the late 30s or early 40s up until like the late 60s. And so by the late 60s, that's when you started to see the MPA. At the time they were called the MPAA. Now it's just the MPA, the Motion Picture Association of America. That's when you actually started seeing ratings. So you saw G, PG, R, and X. There was no PG-13
yet? No.
Until 1984, I believe.
Okay.
But that was actually good for filmmakers, because at the time it was kind of squirrely, where it's like how many times can you say hell or ass or damn? Yeah. Can you show a tit? Can you show a butt?
Is that rule? Hold on. Is that rule about you get one fuck before it's rated R? Is that true?
I don't think so, because there were a lot of PG movies that had at least one or two fucks.
Really?
Yeah. Even in the 80s when they had PG-13, it was like, okay, like so I think the rule now is you can say 3 fucks before it becomes an R. But they can't be used sexually. But then Secret Window with Johnny Depp broke that. So
it's such funny rules.
I know.
Like, a bunch of like Poindexters are like, was that sexual? That's sexual.
Well, do you know how politicians came up with the definition for pornography? It was in like the late 60s, because like, I was like, okay, well, you should be able to show some nudity in a major movie.
Yeah, I think you're talking.
But there is like, there should be a fine line. So from what I understand, a bunch of politicians in like the late 60s, they got together and they were watching a lot of erotic films, or just sort of real movies that just had a lot of nudity. And so somebody asked one of these politicians, I don't know all the details, but somebody asked them, how do you tell the difference between artful nudity versus like pornography? And this is where the phrase, this is the origin of the phrase, I'll know it when I see it.
Okay, so it was just, I know what you're saying. It actually wasn't politicians. It was judges.
It was judges. Okay.
Yes, it was the Supreme Court, and that was Justice. Oh fuck! This is in the Miller test. We actually talked about this a little in our first ever episode.
Oh.
I'm blanking on which justice it was, but it was one of the justices who I think is law. No, yeah, and the funny story was like the law clerk. The justice was old. And I couldn't see well, so he had to like narrate what was going on in the justice's ear. These like pornographic movies. But yeah, it was I'll know it when I see it. And it was for obscenity.
Yeah.
It was for obscenity. Yeah, I'll know it when I see it. Fuck, I should know who that was. I want to say Justice Harlan, but I don't think that's right. I'd have to check, but we learned about that in First Amendment class, and it's always very funny to have to picture some like Yale law graduate like whispering in the Supreme Court justice's ear, like how many pumps he's giving to like Farrah Fawcett or whoever. I don't know if Farrah Fawcett ever did a sex scene, but
no, but yeah, no, seriously, it's the rules, they've always been very subjective, and they're. But that's
you can't say fucking a you can't say fucking a PG movie.
But they have, though, and there are a few movies in the 70s where it's like, hey, I'm seeing some straight up tits in that, like that's and you're saying fuck, but
okay.
But I mean, at the same time, like that's kind of what led to the PG-13 though in the 80s. But right. but at the same time, anyway, like this was kind of good in a way for filmmakers, because at the time it was like, if it shows nudity or if there's too much violence, it automatically gets an X. Even if it wasn't X, even if it wasn't straight up pornography, it was just like, It's just too intense for mainstream audiences. So Jack Valenti, who was head of the MPAA, he was like, okay, like we'll do a rating system. So R, you can show, you can swear a lot more, you can show more nudity, you can have more violence. So anyway, that actually helped open up what you can get away with in mainstream movies. So in the late 60s and early 70s, you saw movies that dealt with more like prostitution and drug addiction and war. Which was a good thing for filmmakers who were, because some of these guys were like in their early 20s. They were film school graduates and they just wanted to take risks and push the boundaries.
Yeah, the 70s. So it was definitely like culturally, it was a time of, I mean, like depression. I mean, some actual depression, like economic depression, like the late 70s and early 70s. I don't even remember. New York, I know, was bankrupt in like the mid to late 70s, and it was a time of it was a very cynical time.
Yes,
and it was tough. Like that. All I think about the 70s is shit was tough. It was like muscle cars, and it was violent, and it was political corruption. And you had these like political machines all over the country, and I think from that grew like really cool art.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so Tarantino actually pointed something out, and it's funny. Like what I was going to say is like it kind of something that I kind of intrinsically knew, but he's the one who kind of really articulated this connection. The first half of the 70s was very cynical because you had Vietnam War, you had Watergate, you had the energy crisis, you had all kinds of. There's so much turmoil.
Yeah.
But the latter half of the 70s, even though there was still plenty of shit going wrong in the latter half of the 70s, but like that was in 75 Spielberg released Jaws. And that was like a big crowd pleasing movie. And then you had in 76, you had
the first blockbuster.
Exactly. Yeah. And then in 76, you had Rocky, which Tarantino kind of points out as like this big, like, fuck yeah. Like, yeah, America, like just like this big,
which
like,
he loves. He loves Rocky.
Yeah. Yeah. He raves about it. And then in 77, you had Star Wars. Yeah. So it just seems like, I wonder if it was just sort of like this reactionary, it might not, it might've been sort of, like not intentional, just sort of like, okay, like we've or maybe it was intentional, but it was just seemed like the first half of the 70s. You had like 3 Days of the Condor. You had All the President's Men. You had these very sort of like paranoid conspiracy. Yes, yeah.
Which he talks about, which was the first movie I'd seen that he has a whole chapter on deliverance. Your Chinatown. Yep. He mentions Chinatown. Yes. It's like literally that's the ending. It's what are you gonna do? It's Chinatown. You could. My interpretation of that is like you kind of plugged into what are you going to do? It's Brooklyn. What are you going to do? It's Detroit. Like it's Miami. It's kind of shrug your shoulders. That basically that shit happens here.
Yes, and you can't fight City Hall, sort of thing.
Yeah, the politician, like you can't fight the power. We tried in the 60s and we lost. The politicians are corrupt. The rich are corrupt. Yeah. The elites are corrupt. They've left us to our like own devices to the worst, like the worst bottom common denominator. But those are awesome movies. Like they're really.
Oh yeah.
You have not seen Deliverance, right? We talked about that.
No, I've seen like the part with like the banjo. That's a great scene. And then of course the rape scene.
Everyone knows it's
the raping. Yeah.
It's one of the most disturbing scenes. What I learned, and I guess I knew this, but the two redneck rapist guys are like actors and not actual rednecks, which like of course, but they're so good that like it's you kind of forget that these are not this like Appalachian hillbilly rapists.
Right.
That movie, I mean, he does criticize the movie too at some points where it's like I don't want to give anything away because you haven't seen it, but
it's fine, don't worry about it.
Well, they do some, and he criticizes a couple things in the movie. And again, it was a book, and I have a note here about how he talks about, I forget what he says, I'll look it up, but book versus movie, and how this might be one of the few movies that's better than the book. I don't know. I don't know if everyone agrees with that. I tend to find the books better, but sometimes the movies are better. I always say Jurassic Park is a great example of that. But like basically, Burt Reynolds is this like badass character.
Yeah.
He, even though he's kind of somewhat cosplaying in a way, I don't think he's as, but that's what Quentin talks about in this. Yeah. But he's still to these Atlanta businessmen. He's, the man of the mountains. And they kind of take him out early. He doesn't die, but he's sidelined early. And I remember I didn't check my review for this. I watched this 2 years ago. I remember being like, why would they take out this character? You kind of got the Boba Fett treatment, which is you introduce this cool character and then you just kind of sideline him pretty early. He lasts a little longer than Boba Fett, but but then that's supposed to add tension because then you have these less experienced guys kind of fending for themselves. And anyway, everyone knows the rape scene. It's disturbing.
Yeah.
But when Quentin also says, I mean, obviously he's so great at articulating these thoughts that I guess I have watching it, but he's just better at articulating it, is like the guy who gets raped kind of handles it better than everyone else, which is really weird to me. I remember watching that. I'm like, he's taking this surprisingly well. Like you could tell he's dead on the inside, but like still he's taking it better than his comrades. I don't know. I would rewatch Deliverance. Also, I feel bad because I had always thought Deliverance took place in West Virginia, and that's just such a stereotype because it's like not even close. It's like down in northern Georgia. I just always thought it was West Virginia because I think people would just like associate it with West Virginia, which kind of sucks. West Virginia's like, what the hell? Like we didn't do that. I don't know. I'm like, oh, this doesn't take place in West Virginia. What the fuck? So yeah.
If that movie were made today, do you think anything like, are there certain scenes that you think would not fly today, or do you think it would be like certain things would be watered down? And not just talking about like the woke stuff per se, but I mean just like are there certain things where it's like, yeah, men today probably shouldn't be acting like that. Like, like are there certain things about the movie that you think could be changed?
I don't remember thinking that at the time. Hold on, I just want to read this line.
Yeah.
We don't watch the rape of Bobby. We bear eyewitness. And it's like fucking true.
Yeah.
Anyway, would anything be changed? I don't know if they do like homophobic slurs and stuff like that. Like I can't remember. Probably. Like, it's a bunch of guys on a river, kind of like on a river rafting tour of this river in northern Georgia that's going to be flooded. I think that's the whole thing. Like it's going to be gone. Like they're getting rid of it to develop stuff. I don't remember. Yeah. And so it's kind of like one last hurrah that Burt Reynolds' character always loved. And I think he takes these 3 Atlanta businessmen with him to go fishing. And then that wouldn't be much of a story. Yeah. And one of them gets raped. One of them almost gets raped. But Deliverance is a good movie. I haven't read the book. I'm looking. Have you seen Logan's Run?
No, I have not. But I know that stars Jenny Agutter. She's the British chick, and that she was an American. She was an American Girl from London. She was like my first big crush.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Farrah Fawcett's in that, and she was one of my first crushes.
Oh.
Yeah, her and Suzanne Summers. And Britney Spears.
I was looking through this was years ago, but I was looking through my mom's yearbook from the 70s, and she had like the big wavy Farrah Fawcett, like
really,
like, yeah.
Yeah. She plays a really small role in it. You could tell it's just like we're gonna put this hot chick in this movie.
Yeah. So this book inspired me to watch 2 Clint Eastwood movies.
Right.
I watched Escape from Alcatraz. And I started watching Dirty Harry, which I haven't finished watching it, but I'm loving it. Okay. Dude, yeah. I love old Clint Eastwood movies so much. He's so fucking cool. Like he's like my hero when it comes to. And so there are 2 scenes, one scene from Dirty Harry and one scene from Escape from Alcatraz that it would be so easy for a woke person to be upset by, but like when you watch it, you're like, okay, no, it's not. It's basically sort of casual, friendly bigotry, and like when you take it out. So in Escape from Alcatraz, so the movie takes place in the early '60s. It's actually based on a true story of the only guys who have ever escaped from Alcatraz. And so the main character is Clint Eastwood, and so he plays this guy named Frank Morris, and so he befriends a black inmate who works at a library, and his name is English, or at least his nickname is English. So he befriends this black guy, and so there's a scene where he's outside in the prison yard, I guess during recess or whatever you call it, outdoor time, and there are these big cement steps, and it's all the black inmates. And then as they go up, his friend English is at the top. So Clint Eastwood starts walking up these steps, and then he's stopped by one of the black guys and goes, "Hey, where are you going?" And then his friend English at the top, he goes, no, it's fine, let him in. So Clint Eastwood walks up, and then so he goes, so what's with these steps? And then he goes, well, the higher up on the steps you are, the more power you have. And he goes, so you're the one with the most power, right? And then the black guy says yes. And Clint Eastwood goes, all right. So he starts walking down the steps, and then English says, so there are only two reasons for why you didn't sit down next to me. Either you're afraid, or you just hate Negroes. He doesn't say Negroes, right? I'm bleeping that out. And then so Clint Eastwood just kind of smiles, and he goes up and he sits down next to English, and then he just says, I hate Negroes. and but like he smirks when he says it. And it's like a white guy casually tossing around the N-word in front of a black guy, but also kind of, but it's like when you watch it's like, okay, it's two guys, and like they're giving each other a hard time about their race, but it's also sort of like, okay, like you can take it, you can dish it out, like, all right, you can hang. And so it's just like out of context, like, oh, Clint Eastwood, saying the N-word in front of a black guy. But it's like, no, these are two, like, that's how they're bonding in fucking prison in 1962. Yeah. It's just like, and then there's similar.
It would not happen today.
Exactly.
That would not happen, even though like they become friends and escape from prison, right?
Like, right.
It still wouldn't happen.
And so there's a similar scene. It's funny because it was actually directed by the same director, Don Siegel, and who now I'm like obsessed with because like he's got such a cool, lean, masculine way of making movies, which I love. In Dirty Harry. So Dirty Harry, he's forced to work with a rookie as his new partner, and he's Mexican. And he hates this guy. He doesn't want to. He doesn't want to bring on any.
He's probably sleeping in the cruiser the whole time.
So Eastwood's just like, well, I already have a partner, but he's in the hospital because that's where all of my partners end up. It's called Dirty Harry. But he's like, no, don't force. If you're gonna make me work with a partner, don't make him a rookie. Like, sorry, you got to work with this guy. So he's showing him the ropes around the police station, and so the police, the Mexican guy, he asks Harry, he goes, hey, so why do they call you Dirty Harry? And then another police officer comes in. He goes, oh, because he hates. And he just lists off all the racial epithets, right? All of them. He's like, because he hates all of them. And then the rookie goes, well, what about Mexicans? And then the police officer says, well, you should ask Harry. And then Harry goes, I hate Spicks the most. But he says that. But he turns to his friend and he winks at him. And it's like, okay, he's just doing it. He's like, I'm just saying that just to get a rise out of my rookie. Yeah. Like, I'm just testing him. And it's like, I'm sure if that were to come out today, people would be upset. Oh, he hates Mexicans. But it's like, no, he's doing it to give his rookie a hard time. Like, if he can handle that, it's just like,
yeah, I've seen that. I see this with my parents and like that generation. Just older generations in general. I feel like race, and I don't think race is the right word because if you like look at Gran Torino, like he rips on white people too. It's just all different types of white. Like what's happened is like the boxes have gotten bigger in terms of like, oh, it's white people and black people and Latinos. It's like, no, but all these people used to talk shit about each other. It's like white people, there'd be different, like the Irish would rip on the Polish and the Polish on the Italian and the Italian on the Jews and the Jews on the German, like everyone. And like Mexicans rip on the Nicaraguans and they rip on the Hondurans and et cetera. And I feel like race was just as it's weird because it's become way more identitarian now because it's like negative and always the oppressor and injustice and all of that stuff. Where back then it was just like kind of a way of bonding and connecting and associating, which was very different. And like everyone was, it was. I see it with the older generations. Like, oh, this person's Italian. Oh, he's Irish. Oh, what? Like now it's just like, oh, they're white, or now they're black, or whatever. And I feel like that used to just be a way that people communicated. Yeah, like there's a focus because it's. I don't know. It's ironic because there's such more of a focus now on race, but it's a different type of focus.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Where the painting with broad strokes sort of thing, because like you're like, it's funny because like while I was reading the Tarantino book concurrently, I was reading another book that's kind of similar. It's called My Lunches with Orson, and it's like this guy who was friends with Orson Welles during the last few years of his life, and so they recorded their lunchtime conversations. So it's interesting, like reading these, like like Tarantino's perspective on film and then Orson Welles' perspective on film. But it's interesting because the book didn't even come out that long ago, probably like 10 years ago. And in the foreword of the book, it was talking about how Orson Welles was very raw in these conversations. Like it's like, oh, there were times when he was racist, when he was sexist, and like, but the only times when he's racist is he's racist toward, like, he'll make generalizations about Irish and Italians and Germans. And like that was considered racist 10 years ago to make jokes about Irish people. It's like nowadays it's sort of like, it's so, so commonplace to just treat them all white people are bad, and not only, and like that's totally fine. But it's just it's just broad, where it's like, oh yeah, if you make a joke about Germans, oh, that's, you shouldn't do that, it's bad.
Yeah, I just think it was people associate, and I think it's just because of the discourse has been so much more like, I mean, it's like coalition building, and it doesn't always work, but there was this coalition that I think has failed, but it was basically the intersectional coalition, was like everyone but the straight white man were on the same side, which is dumb and like anti-factual. But it was this attempt, and if you're gonna push all the white people together, don't be surprised when they like team up. Like, don't be surprised like the Irish and the Germans and the Italians, and we're like, when we were all against each other for stuff, and then you pushed it all together, it's like, all right, I mean, you kind of built this megazord of white people. Like, don't be surprised when we team up. Like, so
John Cleese, who I love, he was on Bill Maher. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was part of that crew. He was on Bill Maher a while back, and he was railing against political correctness. Even though he's a pretty left-wing guy himself, but like but he was talking about, like, in England it's like, we make jokes about the Swedes and the Irish and the Italians and the Germans, but he goes, but in America, if you make jokes about, and we all laugh about it, like everybody's in on the joke, but if you make jokes about Mexicans, there's like, ooh, like the Mexicans are sensitive, don't make fun of them. It's like, that's so odd to me. Like, it's so weird that,
Well, I know over there, like their censuses, they have a separate category for like white British and Irish, and then like other types of white. Like I know like Polish is big. Like I lived in a very Polish neighborhood when I lived in London. I think people don't realize like Catholicism is the largest growing religion in England because of like the Polish is not Islam or Hindu or anything. It's like Catholicism. It's pretty funny. We'll get you. We'll outbreed you. But I don't know. It's yes, John Cleese has said some cringe things, but on this stuff, I agree. But he's like old school. Tons of people from his camp though, who were children of the 60s and 70s, who were this anti-establishment. That was part of it. Was like, because they were the free speech people, and it was the stuffy conservative, like parted hair, bespectacled conservative British guy who was the man, and now it's totally reversed. And people like Bill Maher is a good example of an American version of that. Like he used to rail against the religious right, which doesn't really exist anymore. Kind of, they have more power than I think some people give them credit for, but it's not like they were in the 80s and 90s,
right?
And even the 2000s, Bill Maher ripped against the and like he was very anti-Trump, but I feel like most of what I see Bill Maher talk about now, I used to watch the show regularly, by the way, in law school, but most I think of what he talks about now is like anti-progressive stuff. Now nuts they are.
And it's funny because his politics haven't even changed. He's still a very left-wing guy, but he's also sort of.
It's a lot of us.
I know. Yeah, it's crazy.
Not just like PC stuff, but also like COVID stuff, where he's like, when did the pharmaceutical companies become our heroes? When did like telling people what to do and forcing people, my body, my choice? Like, when did that become the liberal side? And
exactly, because he's railed against big pharma and sort of like, it's like, big pharma's still. Like they're still the bad guys here. Like,
he started with him when I first started noticing Bill Maher being more attractive to my views were when he was like, he was not blowing the whistle, but being on the left, but very anti like crazy Muslim shit. Whether it was cartoons or cutting people's heads off, which you would think that would be, a pretty easy one to pick. What side to be on, but that kind of stuff where he would argue with like Ben Affleck and people Sam like Harris, that. Well, no, Sam Harris was on Bill Maher's side.
Oh yeah. I'm sorry. I'm talking about that specific.
Oh, that's what it was.
debate.
Yeah, it was. You're right. It was Sam Harrison, Ben Affleck, right?
Yeah.
It was the kind of that. Who was his name? Hitchens. Hitchens was like one of those guys. The New Atheist group. That had a lot of impact. I feel like on our generation with the New Atheists. Some of them I like Hitchens. Not Darwin. Dawkins is like. Apparently, Dawkins is like not even liked amongst a lot of those like the intellectual atheist group. Like he's kind of a douche, but I don't know if you like Dawkins, but that's what I've heard.
Yeah. So what else about the Tarantino book? Are there any specific passages that you?
Well, I did. I have some. I loved just a one-liner. I'm a slut for a one-liner. Let me pull it up.
I actually wrote a whole article based on one line from this book.
It's the same line.
I have it marked here.
Is it the harshest censorship is self-censorship?
No.
Okay.
It was admittedly, when you don't give a fuck about other people's feelings, it probably does wonders for your caustic wit. And so that I don't know if you saw it, but it was an article that I wrote said that was called "Stop Giving a Fuck About Your Audience." And so I did see that. Yeah. So that I love that because like when Tarantino when he did Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and he had the portrayal of Bruce Lee, which is controversial.
Yeah, we've talked about that.
Yeah, and so when he went on Joe Rogan and so they brought that up, it was dumb, and so that topic came up, and so Joe Rogan asked him, "Hey, so how do you respond to people who are offended by your portrayal of Bruce Lee?" And then Tarantino says, "They can go suck a dick." But I love that but I love that swagger, just sort of like, I made the movie I wanted to make. If you don't like it, too fucking bad.
So don't get me wrong. I love that too. I don't. First of all, Bruce Lee was extremely arrogant. He was amazing. I have Enter the Dragon on my list here. He was an incredible person. A huge cultural icon. But anyone who knew him will tell you he was extremely arrogant.
Yes.
So his portrayal, it was not like an inaccurate portrayal. I don't know if I think was the issue. Well, I think one issue that he was portrayed as being extremely arrogant, which I think was true. I think the other was, well, could someone like Brad Pitt's character beat him up?
Yeah, could a stuntman beat him? Yeah.
And I think in that same Rogan interview, Tarantino's like that. Like Brad Pitt wasn't just a stuntman; he was like a vet, right?
He's a veteran,
a fighter. So, I mean,
I think the argument that he made was that was that Bruce Lee mostly fought in movies where it was in a controlled environment, whereas Brad Pitt's character had experience actually killing people,
like a street fighter. Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, so no, but I was gonna say is that like again, amazing response. I love Quentin, but do you think he would say that if this was his first or second movie and not his ninth?
I actually think he probably still would say that
you think
was
so?
His first movie. Yeah. So again, when he was on when he was on Joe Rogan and he was talking about the kind of his experience, and he was talking about how when Reservoir Dogs came out, and it was doing really well on the festival circuit, but a lot of people walked out during the scene where the guy's getting drenched in gasoline and gets his ear cut off. And so Harvey Weinstein,
who's that?
The raping. Oh no, he's
kind of like Harvey.
No, and I'm obviously not going to play down the terrible things that he did, but he did. He was a big force in the 90s. He did help a lot of independent filmmakers make it big in the 90s. He helped Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez and a lot of other guys. But so Harvey Weinstein, when he approached Tarantino about distributing Reservoir Dogs, he goes, "Hey, I love this movie. I think this will play really well. But you got to cut that scene out where he's getting tortured." And Tarantino said, "No, I'm not." Yeah, and so he and again, I don't want to praise Weinstein, but like it's kind of an interesting move that he did with Tarantino.
You can praise his business acumen.
His business acumen. Even that's still kind of manipulated, but it is an interesting power move.
Or his willingness to, because Weinstein was powerful then.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like Weinstein, and Tarantino basically he just said no, knowing that this was a big ticket.
Right. Well, here's what
That's
Weinstein did, and
commendable.
it's an interesting power move to make in this position. So when he kept pressuring Tarantino to cut that scene out of the movie, Tarantino kept saying no, and so he said Weinstein paused for a moment, and then he's like, "Okay, leave that scene in the movie, and going forward, I will be seen as the one who let you keep that scene in the movie." And I was like, "Oh, interesting." Like you kind of like the way you kind of switched it around to make it seem like, "Oh, it was your idea." Oh, Weinstein, you're the
I
one
let
who.
you keep it. It is very manipulative.
Yeah,
That's how
yeah,
he. That's how he ate so much box of like famous
yeah.
women.
But
Yeah.
it seems that from the very beginning, Tarantino was always like, I need, like even though this is my first movie and somebody's telling me I need to cut it in order to make a big deal, it's like, no, I'm not going to do it. So it seems like he kind of had that attitude from the very beginning.
Yeah, you're right. That's very commendable. That's very cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, he I like how he mentions Reservoir Dogs in the book that like it doesn't mean anything. Like people were trying to drive meaning from it. It's like, no, it just sounds cool. And that's very Quentin Tarantino. Like it just sounds cool.
He was referencing another movie that had kind of like a vaguish name.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was.
Did I make a note of that? I did. Hold on. I did make a note of that.
It was towards the end, I think. It was like one of the last 2 or 3 chapters, I think.
It was one of the last pages. Oh no, you're right. It was one of the last 2 or 3 chapters. Let me see. It was page 290. One of the first scripts I ever tried writing was a straight up rip off of Stallone's epic titled Brooklyn Brooklyn BR. Don't ask what BR stood for. Like Reservoir Dogs, it didn't mean anything. It just sounded good.
What's funny is that he said the exact same thing with the title for Inglorious Basterds, because Bastards is misspelled, and somebody asked him in an interview, "Hey, so why is it misspelled?" And he goes, "Don't ask me to explain it. It's just one of these random creative flourishes that it just sucks the piss out of it if you explain it. So just
I thought it was misspelled because like Tarantino, I thought kind of famously is like uneducated in terms of like formal education, right? And I thought he spelt it wrong at the top of his script and kept it.
Maybe the excuse that because I remember definitely seeing that interview. It could be like an after the fact sort of thing where it's like, oh, somebody pointed out to
more to it.
Yeah, to be like, oh, it was intentional.
Okay. Well,
it was an artsy flourish.
I like mine. I like what I just said, because it sounded like I thought, I don't know why. Maybe there are deep fakes on the internet, but I thought there's like a picture of the handwritten Inglorious Bastards, script or whatever.
Right.
And it was spelled ERDS, right? Like that's how it's spelled wrong. Maybe I don't know. I like to proliferate that story. I'm gonna keep that going. Did you ever just like make up rumors when you were younger?
Yeah,
I still at your school. Yeah. Like, I remember there's this rumor that went around my school that one of my friends made up, that was just Warren Sapp is gay, and it just like got around the whole school. I guess that people's lives get ruined that way, but it was very funny.
Did you ever read Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail by Henry Thompson?
No, I think I'm going to though.
It's amazing to read. It's frighteningly relevant to current political campaigns. I can't remember the specific rumor, but it was pretty crazy. But like it was in '72, so this was Nixon's re-election campaign, and I think it was from the Nixon campaign. Somebody in his cabinet was going to start a rumor about George McGovern. Some crazy like George McGovern, who was the Democratic nominee, like some crazy rumor like he fucks farm animals or some shit or some crazy thing, and so it was not Nixon, but it was somebody in his cabinet who was trying to start that rumor, and so somebody said, like, I'm not saying that he did it, I just want to force him to deny it. And it's just like it was like a sneaky political move to be like I want to see our opponent use a valuable airtime saying, no, I don't sleep with animals. No, I did not.
That's very lawyerly of him. Like that's like on like a cross-examination, you can get away with doing that stuff.
Right.
I mean, it's a lot of times it's objected to, but there is wiggle room. You have pretty like wide breadth to ask questions. And I don't know if you remember, have you seen Social Network?
Yeah.
Remember at the end, Rashida Jones's character is like talking to Mark Zuckerberg, like kind of like why he's such an asshole, and how she says she's like an expert in voir dire, which if you don't know voir dire is, it's jury selection.
Okay.
And it's like why he would make a terrible witness, and she says something, And he's like, well, that's not true. And she's like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm the one asking the questions. So like just asking the question can be enough. And that's like the same tactic. It's like just getting, it's very smart. Also, Nixon was a fucking idiot because he won that election by, it's the biggest blowout in history.
Like there was one state that he lost.
I think Massachusetts and DC, which are like, okay, those are gimmies for blue.
Yeah.
And he like, that's what Watergate was.
Yeah.
Like spying. It's like, did they not have polling that was going to show he was going to win by an insane amount?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. And someone brought this up recently with how like the backlash of the 60s had really lasted until I would say 2008. Think about it. You had the 60s and then you have Nixon and then you have Ford, who takes over for Nixon. Jimmy Carter, Democrat, wins, but he's like a hokey kind of like populist guy who doesn't become a populist at all. But he's not like I wouldn't say he's like a liberal or like progressive like McGovern was.
Right.
And then you had Reagan for 2 terms. Then you had H.W. Bush. Then you had Clinton, who's like the new Democrats, like neo-lib. You had 2 George Bushes. And then Obama was like the first kind of like anything resembling a 60s liberal.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like the back. And I think that's what we're going to be going through, dude. I think it's going to be a conservative backlash for like several cycles.
Oh, man.
I think we're more polarized now. So it's not like a Republican's never going to win Vermont again, you know, or even California. And I think there's going to be this cultural backlash. Like I think people are sick of it.
Yeah,
and it's nuts. And I don't know if it'll be as pronounced, but I do see culture just bifurcating, and the left has had such a hold on art and culture for so long that I think people are now like little by little they're chipping away. The conservatives are chipping away at it. And I don't say this as a good thing either.
I know.
Like, I do think there needs to be more balance and more options. And as long as like everyone gets a voice and the market, like you can decide what you want.
Right.
That like if you just did that, you would avoid the backlash. It's when it's like in your face and like you feel like you're helpless and your culture is being taken away from you and you're evil for liking what you've always liked or doing what you've always done. I do think we're headed in that direction. I don't know.
No, you might be right. And so it's so funny, and I'm sure you've experienced this to some extent as well. But it's like on social media, whenever I criticize some crazy woke thing online, and then somebody will accuse me of being right wing. It's like I'm not. Like I lean right on a few things, but I'm not a conservative. And if anything, like the reason why I'm so critical of the woke left is because like I don't want to embolden the crazy right. And so it's sort of like it's like I'm definitely seeing some government overreach from the Republican side.
Sure.
And it's like do you maybe it seems good. Maybe it seems good to you right now because you agree with it. But like, do you really think that it's going to be like in the next few election cycles that it's going to be rational moderates who are going to be taking power? No, it's probably going to be extremists, and you're probably going to be like, oh shit, like I was on the conservative side, but now they're going too far. I was always in favor of freedom, but now they're starting to take away my freedom. It's like, well, that's what happens. So it's crazy, man.
I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to get it, but yes, I do want to read that book. I know Hunter S. Thompson was very critical of Nixon, but they actually like talked football a lot, which I thought was cool. Like they both loved football.
Yeah, because there were only like 1 or 2 times that they actually met, and so like I think when he met Nixon, it was like I'm not going to talk politics, but I'll talk football with you. And so like they actually had a long conversation, like in a limo, to the airport. And
Nixon's from California, right?
I think so,
but he was like, I think he was considered a Texan for like electoral. I guess he moved to Texas, but like he was born in California. Which is kind of funny to think about. I mean, so was Reagan.
Yeah. Well, he was governor, and also in Santa Barbara, it's a pretty right wing place. Like, is it Turning Point USA?
Oh,
like one of those more conservative. Like they have like their headquarters there or some shit.
I know. Yeah, Orange County was always very Republican. I think it's gotten a little blue. I think it went blue a couple elections, but I think it's going to go back red.
Yeah. There's always been a kind of a strong military presence in SoCal. It was. I remember a few years ago, there were a handful of prominent right-wing people rising in popularity in SoCal, and somebody even tweeted out like, "Oh, like Los Angeles is secretly becoming very friendly to conservatives." It's like, no, that's not happening. Sorry,
no way, man.
And
no
I'm not even
way.
saying, again, I'm not even saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying, like, it's like, nah, it's way too fucking blue. It's neon blue here.
It's all relative, and that's the thing is like Republicans don't have to do that well in city. They have to just do okay. Yeah. Like New York has gotten a lot redder, both state and city. Like I saw a map of New York City, like 2013 versus 2022 or something.
Yeah.
And it's like crazy how much more red there is, especially outer boroughs. It's really like Manhattan. There's like barely any red, maybe a little in Chinatown, and a little up in like Upper East Side always had like a Republican enclave, but Manhattan's just kind of a blue island. But the outer boroughs, there's like lots of red in Queens and Brooklyn. Staten Island went for Trump twice, like is red, actually red. Not just Staten Island has always been red. It's like the most suburban of the boroughs. And then because you have a lot of Latinos and Asians and Indians and like the Italian and Irish and Polish and Russian neighborhoods are like, especially the Orthodox are very Republican now, and it's kind of crazy to see that like, and all of Long Island now is red after the last election, and it's really New York which kind of like let the Republicans win back the House. Like they flipped several seats, like suburban seats, and like the Santos guy who's nuts is like the most amazing story ever. You've heard of him, right?
Yeah.
The guy's like lied about everything. He's a district that's like part Queens and part Long Island. It's not like he's some deep red upstate district. He's like very moderate, independent district that is scared of New York City. But anyway, I don't know how I got on this. But yeah, so anyway, LA just has to go like a little red, a little more. Like if it goes like 25%, Republicans can do well if they win everything else.
Yeah.
Anywho, all right. Movies.
Yeah.
More.
Oh, there's one thing I want to talk about here, which I think it was kind of formative in Tarantino. You know, because Tarantino, he's attracted a lot of criticism throughout his career for his violence, for the violence in his movies. And so this is kind of interesting here. So this is when he was a kid, and for the most part, his mom gave him kind of carte blanche, like, "Oh, I'll take you to R-rated movies. I'll let you see all kinds of violent movies." But there were like one or two movies that that his mom did not let him see. I can't remember what movie it is, but here's the quote that his mom told him. "Well, Quentin, it's very violent. Not that I necessarily have a problem with that, but you wouldn't understand what the story was about. So since you wouldn't understand the context in which the violence was taking place, you would just be watching violence for violence sake. And that's what I don't want you to do." I was like, that's interesting because like Tarantino.
You don't know what movie that was she was talking about?
Let me see real quick. So I asked her, what movie was it?
Was it Dirty Harry?
No, it was a blaxploitation film called Melinda.
Okay.
Yeah, because he didn't see it until years later. So it was a blaxploitation flick, and I guess there's some like sexual violence or something. But anyway, but like I thought that was fascinating. Like I wonder if that had kind of an impact on Tarantino, where it's like, because all the as extreme as the violence is in his movies, it's always still kind of like for him, it's like like say like the Kill Bill movies, for example, where it's like, yeah, but like, have you seen like, Kung Fu movies in the 60s and 70s? Like they were very bloody. They were over the top where they had like a hose, just blood shooting out.
Yeah.
And like, that's what I'm mimicking. Or it's like, oh, like in Pulp Fiction, that was pretty violent for its time. It's like, yeah, but this is the world of like pimps and drug dealers and assassins.
Yeah.
Like,
mob stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, what the fuck do you expect? Or like, in Django Unchained, it's like, I'm trying to show how terrible slavery was. I'm trying to show how bad it was.
It wasn't pretty.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's interesting where it's like, as over the top as his violence is, there's always some kind of creative justification for it. So I wonder, like, and the fact that he brought up that quote from his mom, was like, no, you like, it's not just the violence I'm objecting to, it's the context. You just would not understand. But so that's why I'm not going to let you, as a 10-year-old, watch this movie this R-rated movie. So I'm wondering if that kind of informed his thing. It was like, okay, you can be over the top, but you have to make sure that you know what the context is of the violence.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. I could see that thread there. Trying to think, because I think he would also say it is very fun. Like, yeah, I said that.
Oh yeah,
like it is very fun. But yeah, I've said before on this show, I think there is this interesting view of violence in our culture compared to things like sexuality.
Yeah.
Like I always bring up the example of my dad scrambling the parts of Starship Troopers where you see boobs.
Oh yeah.
There's like a couple shower scenes and a scene where Johnny Rico is having sex with Diz.
Yeah.
And like those got scrambled, but it's fine to watch the guy get the brain sucked out of his head and guys getting cut in half and their limbs burned off and like all this crazy shit. And I was like 9 years old watching that.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, I can't see a pair of milkers on screen.
Right. Well, I wonder if it's just like, when you watch the news, like it's okay to see like the results of like a blown up building or see like war footage or something like that. But it's so I wonder if it's just sort of like this weird thing where it's like from a young age we're more used to seeing violence. I'm not saying whether it's good or bad. I'm just wondering, and also just like with war movies, for like the longest time, war movies in America at least, they were always seen as like, oh, look how patriotic our men are. But it wasn't until like the 70s where it's like, war is actually kind of bad.
I mean, I was going to say that like our country's built on violence. I don't mean that in like an anti-American way.
Right.
Like we start as a revolution and we have the Wild West and Civil War. And but then again, like what country wasn't?
Yeah.
Like everywhere was in one way. And like Japan and China, these were land like conquests, the Mongols, all of the European wars and empires in the Middle East, Africa, they were enslaving each other and changing religions and going to war. Like not and the Aztecs and Incas were constantly at war, and the Aztecs were chopping people's heads off and rolling them down the pyramid. Like even the this kind of bucolic view we have of Native Americans, like North America. Like no, these were like the Comanches were vicious people. Horrific, did horrific things that mirrored the Middle Ages, if not worse in some cases. So at least there you had Christianity, which like stopped some things. Like a handful of things were too much, even though there was all the torture and all of that. I'm not like giving them a pass at all. Sure. But there was like a handful of, especially maybe when it came to like women, except for witches, but like when it came to women, like the Comanches were brutal. They terrorized the Apaches and other groups. You had the Iroquois Nation and people up in the northeastern part of the country. The only reason it wasn't as vicious there is because they didn't have horses.
Right.
I don't know. So I kind of want to give us the excuse, well, we're built on violence, but everywhere was. Like everywhere's built on violence. But I don't know. I also think part of it, Tarantino kind of got like the Eminem treatment, where it's like he's super popular, so people are gonna criticize him. Like Eminem was rapping about the same stuff every other rapper was rapping about.
Yeah.
Sex, drugs, guns, like the same. Like he took some different. The song Kim was kind of a different level, but I don't know if you remember that song. It's literally a song about killing his wife, but and his daughters there. But it was I don't know. I think he set a target on him. No pun intended. No, but
well, it's funny because like I know that he's gotten criticized for the use of the N-word that shows up a lot in his movies, and he says the N-word himself in Pulp Fiction.
He does, yeah.
But what's funny though? It's like
married to a black woman in the movie.
I know, yeah. But what's funny is sort of like people will make a big deal about the use of the N-word, but they'll kind of give him a pass for like people getting blown up and shit. It's just sort of like really like a handful. And also like in Pulp Fiction, where it's like every character is a sleazy piece of shit underworld criminal. It's like. Yeah, like I'm not going to use clean language.
I will say I am going to say it's a rough scene to watch in Pulp Fiction. Yeah, with the N-word. It's not. I don't think we should though. Like violence is its own category. So I think if you want to compare violence, and sex and language, like it is not always an equal thing. It's like in this movie, this guy got his head blown off, like so they can say the N-word. Well. I don't know. In Pulp Fiction, it does come off as gratuitous. I would actually think he wouldn't I think if he made Pulp Fiction today, he actually wouldn't have that scene. I think he would have every other scene. I'm not saying that scene. I don't think he would talk like that. I really don't.
Well, I don't know the full context of that scene. So, like maybe there was another scene because the character that he played obviously has a connection to the hitmen.
Yeah, Samuel
Jackson and John Travolta. And so for me, like whenever I watch that scene, it's like, yeah, it's a little uncomfortable, but at the same time, it's like Samuel L. Jackson is there, and it's like he's in on the joke. He knows, like, okay, this is a sleazy underworld, reality that we're dealing with, where nobody's holding anything back. And it's so I wonder if he would do that, or if he would kind of like, yeah, I think that was just me kind of just going for broke, just kind of pushing the boundaries. And here's the thing, like, Tarantino doesn't shy away from using the N-word in the book that we read, but at the same time, it's like, but he's got such a deep love for Black culture, though. And I'm not saying that gives him a pass for using the N-word, but it's sort of like, I'm not sure exactly what I'm trying to say, but it's like, it seems like whenever he does use the N-word, either his own characters in his movies or his characters using the term in his movies, it's sort of like, there's some kind of understanding of like Black culture, I guess.
What's different, I think, I'm of course not of the belief that's like it should never be used, because a lot of times it's contextual. Like in Django, it's about fucking slavery.
Exactly.
And Hateful Eight, Bruce Dern's character drops a hard N because he's it's post Civil War. He's an ex-Confederate general or something. He is a literal racist, like a huge fucking racist. Right. And it's character building, and he's an evil motherfucker. So like, I do think it's in Pulp Fiction where he's just like, it's Quentin himself. It's not like a character that Quentin wrote. And it's like saying it to a Black person, it seems gratuitous. He says it like a lot.
There's a dead blank in my driveway. Like,
do you think I like dead N-words in my driveway? Would you want dead? I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not. Look, I love the movie. I'm not saying point. I don't think he would do that today. I think it's the one. I do think he would cut it, and he would not have himself on camera in 2023 saying those lines in a movie that takes place in 2023. Now, a movie that takes place in the 60s, but like a movie that takes place in 2023. So, I mean, my view is don't cut it. Like, it would like if it's on streaming, I hope that doesn't get cut, right? Like that's the movie, and that is what's happening sometimes. Which I think would suck. Like that's what's the word? Extricating or whatever it is.
So every once in a while, a scene will get cut from a movie that explains kind of a plot hole. So I wonder if there was like maybe there was a scene that establishes his character as being a bigoted piece of shit. Besides that scene, obviously, but it's like I wonder if there's like, like if you put that scene in, it's like, okay, it makes more sense. Why?
Well, I even think later showing his wife is Black, it's like that's on purpose.
Right.
Like the wife doesn't even have a line. They could have had anyone. You could have picked a woman off the street to do it. And like I think that was very much on purpose to like fuck with the audience.
Right.
Like, oh really, he's racist? Well, he's married to a Black woman. Like
right.
So which I agree. Like I don't think you can be racist to a race that you're married to. Like you could do something unintentionally racist. But like if you believe racism, I guess it's your definition of racism, which we're not going to get into right now. But like it happens all the time with Bill Burr. It's like, oh, Bill Burr's racist. He's married to a Black woman. Like he makes some jokes that sometimes are like make fun of Black people because he makes fun of everyone. His views. I don't know if he has jokes about it, but
did you ever see this? It went viral a couple of years ago, but so there was some dumb debate, so like between a woke person and a non-woke person. And the woke person said something like, even white men who marry Black women, they'll marry them, because like they want to subjugate them or something like that. And Bill Burr's wife, who is Black, she chimed in and she said, "Shut the fuck up." It's just like, but it's like, yeah, dude, like let white guys marry Black women, like.
There's nothing more racist than being a loving, caring partner for someone of another race. Yeah, the same thing happened with like adoption. It was like, well, that's I mean, this is it's the horseshoe theory. It's why David Duke and Malcolm X actually got along really well, because they had the same goal: separate the races. They had different reasons for it, but they had the same goal. Like it's the same shit.
Speaking of adoption, so I finished the book last night, and
Okay.
The final chapter where he's talking about Floyd, the guy who was living with him.
Unexpected chapter.
Yeah, that was interesting, but like I gotta swear, like I gotta say, like it was actually kind of touching. Like,
very touching. It explained a lot.
Yeah, it did, and especially like the last part where he's talking about how Floyd was basically the one who kind of inspired him to get into screenwriting, because Floyd was so for people who haven't read the book, Floyd was this black guy who was living with Tarantino and his mom for a bit. He kind of floated around in their social circles.
Yeah, he was renting a room.
Yeah, he was renting a room there. But he was a huge fan of movies and pop culture, and so he introduced him and Tarantino. They nerded out over movies and music and everything. And he was kind of a vagabond, where he was sort of like, he had some kind of job, but it was always kind of a little vague about where he was getting his money from. And
he's a drifter,
he was kind of a drifter. But one thing that was kind of interesting about him was that he was interested in screenwriting, and he was working on screenplays. And so Tarantino was talking about how he read this guy's screenplays, and he was talking about how one of the scripts that he wrote was a Western where the main character was like a former slave, or was basically like a black guy in the Wild West, black cowboy who was like this the super cool anti-hero. And so Tarantino says, like, this did not, I didn't use a single scene from that script in Django Unchained. Mm-hmm. However, just the idea of having like a cool black guy, in the Wild West sort of thing, like that sort of basic concept. Yeah. And also, like the final line of the book, he says that when he won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay for Django Unchained, he's like, I should have thanked Floyd for that. It's like, oh man, like that's kind of like a bittersweet ending at the end. Like that was cool.
Wait, yeah, he didn't thank Floyd.
He did not. I think the final line was like, I should have thanked Floyd for that.
Yeah, you're right. So I don't know how he died, where he died, or where he's buried, but I do know I should have thanked him, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, but I want to talk about that chapter a little too, but I just want to say, I never understood like the criticism of Tarantino on these grounds, because it's like, first of all, he could be making stories about any type of person. He made a story about like a heroic black cowboy, which is like rare. Yeah. He put a female lead just kicking male ass in Kill Bill 1 and 2. Like mostly male ass, some female ass, but like just kicking ass, taking her own like life into her own hands and creating her own destiny or whatever it is, like doing really badass shit. And then making a what was the last one? Black Cowboy, Uma Thurman. Oh, and then having a movie where Jews shoot Hitler in the face 1,000 times. Like what, on these identitarian grounds, like, could you ask for anything more?
Exactly. It's like, like the villains in his movies are like slave owners, and
slave owners, Nazis, like the most misogynistic. Remember, like also remember the I'm Buck and I Came to Fuck, like that. Like misogynistic guys. I don't know. I never got it, but people focus on that like one scene in Pulp Fiction where it's like, well, he said the N-word.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like, if anything, there's something very cathartic about a lot of Tarantino.
It's a myopic view. It's stupid.
Yeah,
it's vapid. So
and also Jackie Brown, like the main character, the main character was a black woman, like a really cool, kick-ass black woman too.
Pam Grier, who's an icon.
Yeah. That was a great movie. My roommate Zach showed it to us, and that was like one of the few Tarantino movies I hadn't seen yet. So really? It was so good. I love that one.
Yeah, Jackie Brown's good. He said actually the Samuel L. Jackson character in that is similar to Floyd.
Yes,
like
that's right.
To Floyd,
really cool, but kind of sleazy.
Well, that's what I liked about the last chapter. It wasn't saccharine. It was like, he's like, no, Floyd's an asshole. Like he didn't actually give a shit about me. He only cared about himself.
Yeah.
He definitely did illegal shit. He would not live up to it. He say we're gonna go see a movie on Saturday night and not show up, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
he wasn't. He didn't make him into this father figure, but he also appreciated Floyd for who he was. Yeah. And I thought like that kind of grounded chapter was really, really interesting and like opened up like so unexpected that I got so personal like that. Because besides that, he talks about like, you know, his mom's friends and his mom and like being around adults and so just kind of like basic stuff. And there's like really deep chapter that in the book. Yeah. And how not just to open up about him, but his artistic endeavors.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I always love hearing about sort of like, and here's the thing, like when you're reading the book and you're reading about like the movies that influenced Tarantino, he's not always explicit about how the movie influenced him, but you're also kind of like, okay, he's gushing about this scene. I saw a variation of the scene in, you know, in Inglorious Basterds, or I saw a variation of the scene in Pulp Fiction or something like that, where you're like, okay, I can see how this movie stuck with you. I can see why you're still writing about this movie 40 years later, 45 years later.
Yeah.
There was one scene, I think it was in the there's no table of contents. Did that bother you at all that there's no table of contents?
Wait, yeah, there is. Oh,
not
no,
mine.
There's an index. What are you looking for?
Was it the outing? The outfit?
The outfit.
It has the word, the outfit. That's what it was.
The outfit.
He was talking about some movie. I don't think it was that movie, but I think it was in that chapter. He was talking about a scene where these two characters get into a car together and they're having a very friendly conversation, and then the driver just turns around and shoots the other guy in the head just very casually. And it's like that's like
yeah.
And even Tarantino even says in that, he goes like, yeah, you can see why that's my favorite scene in that movie. And it's like, yeah. Like that was basically Pulp Fiction right there.
Yeah, and I know we're finishing up soon. The last thing I want to say, because we can talk about like we could go on about Taxi Driver and other stuff. We can say that for another episode too if we want to continue. Yeah. But I do want to say I watched Rolling Thunder, really good movie. Simple, what he calls what do you call them, revenge-omatics.
Yeah, that was one some film critic at the time called them at the time.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And there's one line in it that I loved, and then coincidentally, I after I finished the movie that night, I happened to be reading that chapter, and it's so fucking good. Where the main character goes, "I found the men who killed my son," and Johnny, who's Tommy Lee Jones's character, goes, "I'll just get my gear," and I loved that line, and I love that he literally like centers it in the book, in the Courier New typeface, and like it connected with him too, and it connected with all the he said like no matter what theater I was in, because he talks about, actually reminded me of you a little. If you were living back then, like just driving around LA, going to different theaters and watching Rolling Thunder. He said no matter what theater he went to, people loved that line. And I actually felt a connection there. Like I'm sitting on my couch in New Jersey in 2023. Yeah. And I hear that line and I like love it. I immediately pull out my notes app and write it down because I'm going to write my review for it. And then I read that line. I'm like, holy shit, he loved that line. All these audiences in 1970, I forget when that came out.
76 or 77.
Yeah, mid 70s. Yeah. Loved that line. And it's just like, it added so much character development in a single moment. Because Tommy Lee Jones' character like isn't in it that much until the end. He's in it here and there. And just like this military obeisance to like doing your duty and honor and justice all in one sentence. So cool.
Yeah, there's something about 70s dialogue that I love where it's like they weren't afraid to kind of like take a few steps out of comprehension where they're like, okay, I'm going to step back. I'm not going to explain Tommy Lee Jones's duty to you in a long monologue. It's like, no, one line, and you immediately understand. Even though he doesn't go on to some long exposition about his loyalty to his friends. It's like, okay, that one line that sums it up. There's something about 70s dialogue that I just love, where it's like they're not afraid to like condense a big theme into like like one line.
Yeah. I would. So I'm going to see I'm going to watch Dirty Harry. It's on a couple others I put on there that I hadn't seen from the book. Lords of Flatbush, you could see it or not. Like I thought it was low budget. It's fun. It's it's good, but like Rolling Thunder ruled. Like I definitely recommend seeing it. Tarantino said it's one of the best character studies he's ever seen. He says how like I love that actor. It was like one of those movies where I went and I looked up that actor, Duvain. Is it William Duvain? And like wanted to see more of him because I didn't really know him, and he was so good in it.
Yeah, that's definitely on my list. Yeah, like I've seen a lot of movies from that era, and I'm glad that Tarantino shone a spotlight on a bunch of movies that I hadn't seen yet. But yeah, I watched Escape from Alcatraz from.
I'm gonna do that one too.
That's a really damn good. I've actually been to Alcatraz, so it's actually been really fun. Yeah, I've been there 2 or 3 times. Yeah, I mean, like I killed a couple people, so whatever. I had I did not. No. So actually, interesting little trivia fact. That movie is part of the reason why there is electricity at Alcatraz, because when they were shooting there, because the prison actually shut down in like the mid 60s, and so they just kind of let it rot for a while. But like because they needed to like shoot, they have lights and cameras and everything, they actually had to like create a whole bunch of cables from San Francisco to Alcatraz.
Wow.
So that's the reason why it's kind of like a tourist trap nowadays, because of that movie. Cool. Yeah, but it's funny because like when you watch that movie, it's PG rated. It's like this would not be rated PG today. Like it's a little stronger than that, but check out Cinema Speculation.
Cinema Speculation, we can bring up some of the stuff again later.
I
mean we've had a whole episode on Tarantino. What's your favorite Tarantino movie?
It goes back and forth because for the longest time it was Pulp Fiction, but I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Really? Yeah, I could see you loving it. You love LA.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, my roommate a few years back, his previous girlfriend, for his birthday, she took him to the Mexican restaurant. It was the final place that Sharon Tate ate at before she died.
Yes.
El Coyote, which is still there apparently.
Really?
And it's still there. Yeah, it's been there for like 50 years or something like that.
Cool.
And then right afterwards, she took him to see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So it was like he's like, oh, this is so like cool, like just like all this stuff.
Cool.
And,
that is what's cool about. I mean, you took me to see the spot where is it Tim Roth's character gets shot in?
Yeah,
Reservoir Dogs. Is that Tim Roth? Yeah.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I didn't even notice this until like a few weeks afterwards. On my fridge, there's a map of Highland Park, the neighborhood that I live in LA, and it has all the shooting locations of Reservoir Dogs. And so I asked my roommate, I was like, hey, where did you get this at? And he goes, oh, we went to that film festival a few weeks back. I thought you got one of those. I was like, no. So they actually it actually shows, it's like, oh, like here's where Mr. White gets shot, and here's where the chase scene between Mr. Pink and Mr. Brown takes place. I was like, oh shit, like it's all right here within walking distance.
That's very cool.
Yeah. But anyway, Tarantino's cool. Movies are cool, and
movies are cool.
Yeah, I like them. And stay reckless, Mr. Tarantino. And you too, Ben.
Stay reckless, Joe. Fight the crits.
Fight them.
Fight.